Committee on Oversight and Government Reform will come to order. Without objection, the Chair is authorized to declare recess at any time. I want to thank you all for being here. It's an important topic as we discuss firearms and munitions and examining the safeguards that may or may not be in place there. And that's of utmost concern, I think, to the public and certainly to the Congress. There have been reports and investigations, and I think this is a good opportunity to have a candid discussion with members asking questions. Obviously, keeping a list on what government agencies own should be a routine practice. It's always fascinating to me that we, for instance, don't have an inventory of all the assets that the government owns. Can't tell you how much real property they own. Can't tell you exactly how many buildings that we own. You can't go online and say, show me a list of these things. There's some things that maybe shouldn't be out there in the public. I understand that. We don't want to let the adversary know the details of specifics regarding ammunition and munitions, but when you have a list and you're tracking it adequately, you know its inventory, and you know when something's no longer there, if it goes missing, you know if you have a problem with theft. And when we're talking about guns and ammunition and even more powerful things than your regular 22, then you've got an issue that we need to discuss. The Office of Personnel Management does not have a list of its servers, its databases, or network devices, and then it lost information on 21 million Americans. GSA was trying to maintain an inventory of surplus firearms around the country, which was on an Excel spreadsheet, and it lost 485 firearms, including grenade launchers, Uzis, and assault rifles. Government-wide federal agencies purchased roughly $1.5 billion worth of firearms, munitions, and equipment between 2006 and 2014. We need to make sure this is safeguarded and there are adequate auditing in place. This past March, the Department of Justice Inspector General released a report detailing the lack of proper inventory and control procedures at the Bureau of Prisons. The Inspector General started its audit of armory practices after a Bureau employee pled guilty to stealing flashbang stun munitions. When the IG reviewed 7 of the 120 armories at BOP facilities, it found insufficient firearms and munitions controls and practices, which created increased risk of loss and theft. The audit discovered the record system that was used to track munitions did not record changes to the inventory, and forms used to check out munitions and firearms were incorrect and incomplete. And again, this was only at 7 of these facilities. Again, without adequate tracking, it is extremely difficult to maintain an inventory. When on-site inventory counts were conducted at armories, auditors found actual inventory did not match what was reported. There were numerous instances where the inventory report stated more or less than the actual amount of munitions present at the actual armory. The result of these discrepancies is that the only person who knows the correct count is the officer in charge of the armory, and we even question whether that's true. The Bureau of Prisons is not alone, though. It's an inventory trouble. The release of the Department of Justice Inspector General report came only a short time after an equally troubling finding at the Department of Homeland Security's the safeguarding of firearms. In February 2016, multiple news agencies reported that during a 31-month period between 2012 and 2015, Homeland Security lost 165 firearms, along with more than thousands of badges and credentials. When the committee reviewed the documentations for losses between 2012 and 2015, it was discovered the number of lost firearms actually exceeded 220, including at least 1 firearm known to have been later used in a violent crime. Loss of a single firearm is cause for concern. The loss of what amounts to roughly 5 a month is totally unacceptable. This is especially concerning for a department charged with keeping our homeland secure, but it's not the first time Homeland Security has had issues with firearms inventory practices. In 2010, the DHS Inspector General found that between fiscal years 2006 and 2008, the agency lost roughly 289 firearms. That means that in just 7 years, Homeland Security has lost more than 500 firearms. High-profile crimes connected with firearms lost by other agencies, such as the Bureau of Land Management, indicate that weak inventory accounting and controls are potentially widespread among federal agencies. It is abundantly clear that when it comes to federal agency firearms and munitions, Nobody is minding the store. It's a problem that must be fixed. That's why we're here today, and we appreciate the testimony and the interaction we'll have. With that, we'll now recognize the ranking member, Mr. Cummings.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I thank you for calling this hearing. Last month, a deranged terrorist walked into a nightclub in Orlando and shot down 49 innocent people in one of the most devastating gun massacres in our nation's history. To say that our prayers go out to the families, while certainly true, is simply no longer enough. We do not have the right to remain silent. We cannot ignore them. We must act, and we must act now. Every year, about 12,000 Americans are killed with guns. I haven't even included the suicides. In my hometown of Baltimore, more than 300 people were killed last year alone in shooting-related homicides. We, as elected officials here in the Congress, should be able to agree that suspected terrorists should not have guns. The American people already agree. Law-abiding gun owners agree. People who support the Second Amendment agree. But this proposal is opposed by the NRA, the gun manufacturers, and the Republican leaders who will not allow a vote to close this terrorist loophole. Instead, Speaker Ryan announced plans this week to call up a phony bill endorsed by the NRA that continues to allow suspected terrorists to buy guns unless there is an arrest warrant against them. And now even that proposal has been put on hold. Let me ask you this. If we ban a suspected terrorist from boarding a plane, why in the world would we let him walk across the street into a gun store and stock up on military-style assault weapons within 72 hours? It makes absolutely no sense, but that's what this NRA bill would do. We here in Congress should also be able to agree that no convicted felon should have guns. If people are convicted of violent crimes, they should not be allowed to buy semi-automatic firearms, 50 caliber sniper rifles, or other types of deadly weapons. Having a background check before any gun changes hands is a common sense proposal supported by a wide majority of Americans, including law-abiding gun owners and strong supporters of the Second Amendment. But again, the NRA, gun manufacturers, and their Republican supporters in Congress prevent this from happening. We here in Congress should be able to support a federal law against illegal gun trafficking by drug cartels or other criminal organizations. We've heard firsthand from law enforcement agents in testifying at this very witness table that the current statute is just a slap on the wrist. And they begged us to address it. They called it a toothless paperwork violation. That is why Congresswoman Maloney and I introduced the Gun Trafficking Prevention Act. This bipartisan bill, co-sponsored by Republicans, including Patrick Meehan, Michael Fitzpatrick, Scott Rigo, and Peter King. It gained more than 100 co-sponsors and was supported by law enforcement organizations across the country. But that was more than 3 years ago. More than 3 years ago. Since that time, many people have died, shot down the gun. Since then, there has not been one hearing, one mock-up, or one vote on our bipartisan proposal. Our bill, like so many other common sense proposals, has been gathering dust because Republican leaders refuse to allow a vote. Of course, federal agencies must safeguard their firearms, which is the subject of today's hearing. Everyone on this panel agrees with that. Last year, a young woman, Kate Stanley, was killed by a convicted felon when a duty pistol that belonged to a ranger from the Bureau of Land Management. She was killed with it. The gun was stolen from his vehicle a week earlier. Of course, it is appropriate to examine crimes committed with federal firearms that are lost or stolen, and to identify improvements in the way federal agencies keep their inventories. But we can no longer ignore the far more massive carnage caused by non-federal guns every single day in this country. There has been some very high-profile shootings, and these shootings cause people to demand action. But there are also many, many shootings every single day that do not get the attention. Directly across the street from me in Baltimore, 30 feet from my house, lives a young man named Rasan Hammond. He is a 36-year-old who has a master's degree, and he owns a sound studio in East Baltimore. His mother is the graduate dean emeritus of the Maryland Institute of Art. Just last week, Mr. Hammond was driving away from his studio in Baltimore when his car was shot at 6 times. One of the bullets entered his heart, and my neighbor of 20 years had the good fortune that his heart miraculously pumped the bullet into his aorta. Mr. Hammond was also shot in the arm. Doctors say that he will survive, he'll be okay, and there's 1 in a 10 million chance that somebody could be shot in the heart and survive. Miraculously, the bullets were recoverable, and he survived and is now recovering. Police have not identified a suspect in this shooting, but this one example highlights the scope of this epidemic. Dozens of people just like young Mr. Hammond are gunned down every single day in our country, and many are not as lucky as he was. As I close, the bottom line is that we do not want any suspected terrorists to get a gun. We do not want any felon to get a gun. And we do not want any trafficking organization to get guns. But there has been no credible action by Republican leaders to address these issues. The American people want us to move beyond false choice of no guns at all or the Wild West of firearms on demand. We can, yes, we can, and we must make common sense improvements on a bipartisan basis, and it is our solemn duty to act now to prevent the further loss of life of our own citizens. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I thank you for your courtesy, and I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. We'll hold the record open for 5 legislative days for any members who'd like to submit a written statement. We'll now recognize our panel of witnesses. We're pleased to welcome the Honorable Michael Horowitz, Inspector General of the United States Department of Justice, Mr. Thomas Kane, Ph.D., Acting Director of the Federal Bureau of Prisons, Mr. Stephen Ellis, Deputy Director of the Bureau of Land Management in the United States Department of the Interior, and Mr. Jeffrey Orner, who's the Chief Readiness Support Officer at the United States Department of Homeland Security. We welcome and thank you all for being here. Pursuant to committee rules, all witnesses are to be sworn before they testify. If you will please rise and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. You may be seated. Let the record reflect that all witnesses answered in the affirmative. I think most of you I think all of you have testified before Congress. If you please limit your verbal comments to 5 minutes, we'll give you some latitude, obviously, but your entire written statement will be entered into the record. Mr. Horowitz, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Cummings, members of the committee. Thank you for inviting me to testify today. The safety and security of federal prisons remains one of the Justice Department's top management challenges, and the proper authorization, use, and tracking of BOP armory, munitions, and equipment are critical factors in ensuring the safety and security of our federal prisons. The OIG recently audited the BOP's munitions controls following an OIG investigation that resulted in a BOP Special Operations Response Team member pleading guilty to stealing stun munitions from a BOP facility. Our audit identified several weaknesses in BOP's policies and practices for safeguarding armory munitions and equipment, although we did find that BOP had not lost any firearms in those munitions facilities. Specifically, we found weaknesses in BOP's controls over tracking, issuing, and reporting on both active and expired armory munitions and equipment, as well as institutions' compliance with existing policies. Significantly, we found that a BOP security officer can move inventory in and out of the armory and change information in the BOP's inventory data system without leaving any record that a change in inventory occurred. We also found that information in the data system was neither complete nor accurate. Our audit also identified inventory errors that BOP institutions should have identified themselves during their quarterly physical inventories, but did not. Additionally, the authorization and use of armory munitions and equipment was not always adequately documented. Finally, we found that the BOP's controls are not adequate to ensure that only authorized armory munitions and equipment are stored in those armories. We identified unauthorized chemical agents and ammunition among BOP institutions' armory inventories, and in many instances we were not able to determine if the munitions were authorized because BOP's lists of authorized munitions were outdated and otherwise inadequate. Our report made 14 recommendations to the BOP, and the BOP agreed with all of them. The challenge of prison safety was further demonstrated in a report we issued last month assessing BOP's efforts to prevent contraband from being introduced into prisons. We found that recoveries of weapons, narcotics, and tobacco in BOP institutions had increased significantly. We also determined that BOP had not effectively implemented its staff search policy to deter staff introduction of contraband. In a 2003 OIG report, we recommended that BOP revise its policies to require searches of staff and their property when they enter prisons. After more than 10 years of negotiation with its union, BOP implemented a new staff search policy in 2013. However, last year, the Federal Labor Relations Authority ordered BOP to stop using that 2013 staff search policy, following a union challenge to it. As a result, more than 13 years after our 2003 report, BOP still has no comprehensive and effective staff search policy. We made 11 recommendations in our report to BOP to improve its ability to interdict prison contraband, and BOP again agreed with all of those recommendations. Weapons in BOP prisons represent not only a life-threatening danger to BOP staff and inmates, but also to those in law enforcement, such as FBI, DEA, and OIG agents, who investigate serious criminal conduct in federal prisons. My office knows those dangers all too well. In June 2006, OIG and FBI agents were at a BOP prison to arrest 6 correctional officers on charges of smuggling contraband and sexual abuse of inmates, when one of the corrupt correctional officers drew a firearm that should not have been in the prison and shot both a BOP staff member and OIG Special Agent Buddy Sentner. Agent Sentner returned fire, killing the corrupt correctional officer and likely saving the lives of fellow agents and innocent bystanders. The BOP staff member survived his wounds. Agent Sentner did not. Such tragic events demonstrate the critical need for the BOP to have an effective staff search policy to keep dangerous contraband and weapons out of prison, and to make sure it has sufficient measures to control and account for all of the munitions and other weapons that are legally kept in its armories. This concludes my prepared statement. I'd be pleased to answer any questions the committee may have.
Thank you, Mr. Horowitz. Mr. Kane, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Chaffetz, Ranking Member Cummings, and members of the committee. I appear before you today to discuss the mission and operation of the Federal Bureau of Prisons, and specifically our armory policies. We appreciate the committee's interest in this issue. Our detailed response to your inquiry regarding lost and stolen firearms was provided on June 24th, 2016, and our records indicate no lost, stolen, or missing weapons. We also appreciate the considerable work of the OIG on their audit of Bureau Armory, ammunitions, and equipment. We concurred with all 14 recommendations in the report and provided the first status update on June 21st, 2016. The overall status with 3 closed recommendations, and we look forward to continuing to work with the OIG as we improve our systems for documenting and tracking munitions equipment in our armories. I am honored to speak on behalf of the nearly 39,000 Bureau staff, law enforcement professionals who are correctional workers first and support the agency's mission and core values of respect, integrity, and correctional excellence. Every day, when staff go to work at Bureau facilities around the country, they put the safety of the American people above their own. These dedicated public servants are committed to the highest standards of professionalism. Their courage, bravery, and sacrifice are essential to keeping our communities safe and our institutions secure. As our nation's largest correctional agency, the Bureau houses approximately 195,500 inmates in our federal prisons nationwide. Our mission, which dates back to the Bureau's establishment in 1930, is twofold. First, to protect society by confining offenders in prisons and community-based facilities that are safe, humane, cost-efficient, and appropriately secure. And second, to ensure that offenders are actively participating in programs that will assist them in becoming law-abiding citizens. We have had great success with respect to both parts of our mission. Our facilities are safe and secure, and the latest research indicates 34% of released federal offenders are rearrested or have their supervision revoked within 3 years, as compared to almost 68% of offenders released from state prisons. Those numbers are a testament to the quality of evidence-based programs our staff provide in an environment that promotes respect and self-improvement. In support of our public safety mission, the Bureau maintains armories for emergency equipment that is made available as required for certain correctional posts, for particular emergency situations, and for training. In 2011, a Bureau staff member pled guilty to 1 count of transfer of a stolen flashbang device, which was taken during a Special Operations Response Team training exercise at Florence, Colorado. The staff member was terminated from the Bureau and was sentenced to 6 months home confinement, 3 years probation, and restitution for the value of the stolen goods. The Bureau reported this incident to the Department of Justice's Office of Inspector General and cooperated fully in the investigation. We also took immediate steps to modify the armory tracking form for better accountability of the munitions taken out of and returned to the armory. Since that time, we have also made additional changes to the form as recommended by the OIG to further improve the accountability. As I stated previously, the Bureau agrees with all 14 of the OIG report recommendations. The OIG has closed 3 recommendations, and the Bureau has recently completed 2 additional recommendations that will be reported to the OIG in our next status update. We are developing a national database that will strengthen and enhance our systems of control to support the remaining recommendations. We are confident that in addressing the issues identified in the report, we will be enhancing the safety of our staff, inmates, and the public. Chairman Chaffetz, Ranking Member Cummings, members of the committee, this concludes my formal statement. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kane. Mr. Ellis, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Hey, good morning, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Ranking Member, and members of the committee. I am Steve Ellis. I'm the Bureau of Land Management's Deputy Director for Operations. Appreciate the opportunity to discuss BLM's firearms management practices here this morning. The dedicated men and women who make up the BLM law enforcement program play an integral role in ensuring public safety and fulfilling our agency's multiple use and sustained yield mission. Every day, our officers put themselves in harm's way to investigate vandalism and looting, support emergency response, and provide a safe environment for employees and the visitors to our nation's public lands. Nationally, the BLM manages a wide variety of resources spread over 245 million acres of public land and 700 million acres of subsurface mineral estate. There are many federal laws and regulations that guide BLM in managing these public lands, and the BLM has been given specific resource protection and law enforcement responsibility to further that mission. The BLM manages more than 10% of the nation's surface area and yet has one of the smallest law enforcement organizations among the Department of Interior's bureaus. The BLM is roughly one law enforcement officer for every 1 million acres of public land that we manage. The public lands managed by BLM are predominantly located in the western United States, including Alaska, and consist of a very diverse landscape and resources. As a result, the specific duties of each BLM law enforcement officer can vary considerably. In all areas, BLM law enforcement officers work in cooperation with local sheriff's offices, state agencies, and other federal law enforcement agencies. BLM has approximately 185 law enforcement rangers and 75 special agents on staff who enforce a wide range of laws and regulations in preventing, detection, and investigation of crimes affecting public lands resources. BLM provides each law enforcement officer with the necessary tools to protect themselves and others as they carry out their official duties. The BLM is vigilant about its responsibility to control, secure, and safeguard firearms that its law enforcement officers are issued to carry out their duties and their responsibilities. The standard firearms issue for each officer is a semi-automatic pistol for primary duty carry, a semi-automatic pistol as a backup weapon, a shotgun, and a semi-automatic rifle. The Department of Interior outlines policies for firearms inventory, accounting, control, disposal, and destruction. As detailed in the Department's letter to the committee on this issue that was transmitted last month, those procedures are included in the departmental manual and federal regulations, GSA federal property management regulations. Among other requirements, departmental policy mandates that bureaus perform a physical firearm inventory of issued firearms twice a year. On rare occasions, BLM's law enforcement officers may seize or confiscate firearms as part of criminal investigations or when an owner voluntarily surrenders them. Federal regulations, GSA guidelines, and Department of Interior property management directives are also followed when BLM periodically disposes of or destroys seized or confiscated firearms and other firearms deemed unserviceable, excess, voluntarily relinquished, or abandoned and not suitable for government use. In the event that a firearm is lost or stolen, the BLM complies with departmental policies that mandate notification to the department within 24 hours for all lost or stolen firearms. Documentation and investigation of each incident occurs. It's entered in the Lost or Stolen Firearms National Crime Information Center database and entered each incident into the department's internal affairs database. Over the last 10 years, the BLM has reported 1 firearm lost and 7 as stolen. 6 of these were recovered. There is only 1 instance during that period in which a lost or stolen BLM firearm has been implicated in subsequent criminal activity. On June 27, 2015, a BLM officer's handgun was stolen from his personal vehicle in San Francisco, California. The theft was immediately reported in accordance with BLM's policies and procedures. The gun was confirmed to have been used in a shooting that occurred in San Francisco on July 1st, 2015. Thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony today, and I'd be glad to answer any questions you may have.
Mr. Ellis, thank you. Mr. Orner, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Chavez, Ranking Member Cummings, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. I am Jeffrey Orner, DHS's Chief Readiness Support Officer, a career civil servant with 35 years of experience in the federal government, including executive leadership positions at Department of the Navy, the Coast Guard, and DHS headquarters. My office provides policy and oversight of DHS's real estate, mobile assets, such as vehicles and aircraft, environmental compliance, logistics, and personal property, including firearms. Our goal is providing our dedicated workforce nationwide with the operational tools and support they need to keep our nation safe and to be strictly responsible stewards of government resources as we carry out those missions. Today, I will discuss how the Department ensures accountability for firearms and ammunition. DHS is the nation's largest law enforcement agency. Firearms are critical tools for the men and women who perform the Department's various law enforcement missions on the borders, in our cities, and in the maritime domain. Any lost firearm is a very serious matter, and my office has placed strict controls and reporting requirements to ensure 100% accountability at all times. The foundations of our program are personal accountability, rigorous internal controls, and comprehensive data that we use to continually improve our internal controls over the DHS firearms program. I am pleased to report that DHS has made significant progress in reducing the number of firearms lost each year. Since the Inspector General reported on this issue in 2010, DHS's weapons portfolio has increased by 9%. However, at the same time, we have cut our annual firearms losses by 28%. DHS annual firearms losses now stand at 69 annually out of a total inventory of more than 204,000 weapons. This represents a loss rate of approximately 3/100ths of 1% of our inventory. In performing our headquarters role, we have significantly improved the management and oversight of firearms, as well as all accountable personal property and sensitive assets. Through implementing the first DHS-wide firearms policy in April 2010, which we updated again in 2013. We strengthened the DHS Management Directive covering personal property asset management in 2012, and we updated the DHS Personal Property Asset Management Manual in 2013. Through these governing documents, we have established strict accountability procedures that clearly guide how our operational components are to process lost, damaged, or stolen property, including firearms. For example, those procedures require immediate internal notifications as well as external alerts to law enforcement authorities in the event of any lost or stolen firearms, law enforcement badges and credentials, or other mission-critical assets. Departmental policy also requires our components to establish internal policies to ensure proper accountability, tracking, loss reporting, and safeguarding of all firearms. In addition to improved policy and procedures, we also enhanced our data systems. Since 2012, department-wide reporting and tracking of lost, damaged, destroyed, and stolen government property has greatly improved with increased visibility of our data. For example, we moved from a system of manually combining multiple spreadsheets into one form to a real-time database that is updated directly by our operational components and is visible to my staff at headquarters. This enables DHS to monitor compliance with policy and procedures for firearms and other accountable assets through a monthly scorecard measure utilizing standards derived from the American Society for Testing of Materials. Although it's clear we've made progress in reducing the number of lost and stolen firearms, the loss of any firearm is unacceptable. At the same time, it is important to understand that unlike the military, which generally does not allow its members to take firearms off base and usually stores them in a secure armory, DHS law enforcement personnel are seldom without their weapon. They take them home with them, carry them in their vehicles, and employ them in a very austere, demanding environment because they are always on call to respond. One example of such a loss involves a U.S. Border Patrol officer stationed in Arizona near the southern U.S. border. The officer's home was burglarized, and his service weapon, a pistol, which was secured in a CBP-issued lockbox, was stolen. In this case, as in other similar cases, it could be surmised that the officer and his residence were known in the community, thereby making his residence an optimal target for such a theft. Given the environment in which our law enforcement agents operate, it is very difficult to ensure all losses, to eliminate all losses. However, when the losses occur, our procedures are very clear. The officer's supervisor is notified within 2 hours, as is local law enforcement. This initiates a chain of events leading up to a formal report of survey being completed and a lost, damaged, or destroyed report, which is sent to my office where the information is loaded into our data system and incorporated into our scorecard measures of loss rates, submission timelines, and adjudication timelines. Follow-on investigations and any disciplinary actions are determined by each operational component, by the operational chain of command. The Department takes very seriously its role as a steward of government resources, and we will continue to evaluate our current policies and procedures, and we will continue to identify areas for improvement and to act on those. Thank you for the opportunity to give my opening statement today. I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, and I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes. Mr. Horowitz, you've done some good, thorough work with the Federal Bureau of Prisons. They have, according to Mr. Kane, accepted all of those recommendations, but what about the implementation? Where are we at with the actual implementation?
About 2 weeks ago, we got an update report from BOP requesting as to 4 of the recommendations that we close them. We agreed that 3 could be closed. We disagreed on the 4th, and so at this point, 11 of the 14 remain open, and we would expect an update within 90 days from BOP on its progress on all 11 remaining items.
Is that behind schedule, ahead of schedule, what you anticipate?
Generally speaking, it's consistent with the schedule we require of components, that within 6 months we have made substantial progress towards closing recommendations.
And Mr. Kane, you're committed to implementing all of those? It's one thing to accept the recommendations, another thing to actually implement it.
We are, Mr. Chairman, absolutely.
All right. Mr. Ellis, we have sent you a letter back in March trying to get an assessment of the ammunition and weapons that the BLM has in inventory. We have yet to get that. You have approximately 260 Rangers and Special Agents, right?
That's correct.
And you're sitting next to Mr. Orner, who has hundreds of thousands of employees at the Department of Homeland Security. How many weapons, what types of weapons, and how much ammunition does the BLM have?
We have approximately 1,480 firearms, and of those, 1,040 are issued to law enforcement officers. I mentioned in my testimony 4 weapons per officer, and we have about, with 185 Rangers, 75 agents, 4 weapons each. That's 1,040 issued. There are at least 440 that are unissued. Of those, there are approximately 290 are suitable for use, 150 unsuitable for use. Of those that are unsuitable, about 30 of those are training weapons, and at least about 120 that are damaged or old.
When will this committee get a written record of your current inventory and the things that we had requested back in our March 9th letter? When will we get that answer?
Okay. It's my understanding, Mr. Chairman, that the department provided a great deal of information in response to your questions, and
You copied your personnel manual and sent it to us. That's not what I'm looking for. The letter was very specific. I shouldn't have to send you a couple letters and have a hearing to finally start to hear some numbers. It can't be that difficult. And if it is that difficult, that highlights the problem that you can't just go somewhere and print out the current inventory and what the inventory has been for the last few years.
well, if there's some additional information, Mr. Chairman, that we need to provide, I'll look into it.
Okay, go back and look at the letter of March 9th. I want to know when I'll have, not significant, but I want 100% of the response to that letter. When is it reasonable to get a response to that letter?
I will get back to the committee on the information that you requested. As I indicated,
What does that
to you
mean?
now.
I mean, boy, that's generous of you, but should I issue a subpoena? Is that what you need? Do you need a subpoena?
No.
How about this? I'll issue a subpoena by the end of the week, unless you provide the information.
Okay, we will look into providing you the
So
information.
you do have information, you do have data, you just have been unwilling to share it with the committee. This is what's ridiculous. Why should I, as the chairman, and the other members of this committee, why should I have to sign a subpoena? Why is this a difficult exercise?
Mr. Chairman, as I said, I will be happy to look into the information that you requested, that you indicate is not.
When did you first know that I sent Mr. Cornsey a letter? When did you first understand that?
I cannot tell you what the exact date is. I see a lot of letters.
Your first clue should have been that that we sent a letter. Second clue should be that there were other letters, and then there should be another clue that we had a hearing, and then we rescheduled this hearing. So you have no excuses not to have this information at your fingertips and be able to provide it in writing to this committee.
Mr. Chairman, I know there was a response that was sent to you from the department.
It was a copy, part of it was a copy of your personnel manual. That was not what we asked for in the letter. Wait, look, get it to us by the end of the week. If we don't have it by by noon on Friday, I will issue a subpoena. Is that fair?
Fine.
Is what?
There's a letter that was.
Did you say fine? What did you say?
Fine, fine. Yes, I understand. There's a letter that the department sent to you on June 14, 2016, that does summarize the firearms for the various agencies in the
We
department.
want the specifics of it. Just go back and read the letter, and then I want you to tell me, and I want Mr. Cornsey to tell me. I find to be a very nice gentleman, but I need some competency here in actually providing that information to this committee in its totality. Not significant, but its totality. My time has expired. I have other questions, but let's recognize Mr. Lynch of Massachusetts for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I share your frustration with the lack of information, so maybe we could work together on that subpoena. Let me, I do want to ask you, Mr. Orner, and maybe Mr. Horowitz, you could jump in here. We're talking about the custody of firearms, and we have a bill on the floor, maybe later today and tomorrow, that ties in with DHS in a direct way. The bill would prevent anyone on the terrorist watch list from obtaining a firearm, but the language of the bill requires that there be probable cause. Now, that's a pretty high standard, and I'm concerned that in many cases we do not require probable cause. We require reasonable cause for somebody to be placed on the terrorist watch list. So we have a reasonable suspicion that this person might be engaged in terrorist-related activity. But the bill would require, in order to stop that person from purchasing a firearm, a higher standard. In other words, DHS or the Joint Terrorist Task Force or the FBI would have to have probable cause, a higher standard, in order to stop a person who is on the terrorist watch list or on the no-fly list from purchasing a firearm. Now, Mr. Orner or Mr. Horowitz, would you hazard an estimate of the efficacy of that provision of requiring probable cause to block somebody who's on the terrorist watch list, but we don't necessarily have probable cause, we have reasonable cause, what the impact of that provision might have on the safety of the American public?
Congressman, that is a critical issue. However, I am responsible for the department's real and personal property and for...
You're an advisor too, though, sir, right?
I do not have a professional involvement in that issue. The department would be happy to provide you with a witness who can address that, but I can only discuss our property-related programs.
You can't blame a guy for fishing, though, right?
No, you can't.
Okay. Mr. Horowitz.
Congressman, we obviously are not involved as DHS, and the department is in maintaining the terror watch list. We've done oversight work on how the FBI maintains the terror watch list. But on the question of what standard to include, that's not something that is
all right, Mr. Horowitz. All right, you've suffered enough. Let me ask you something that you might know about. In my experience, I spend a fair amount of time in the prisons in my district, briefly, and in most cases, there's fairly good coverage of of cameras. There's obviously, because of prison violence, accusations against corrections officers, contraband. So most of the prisons that we visit have strong surveillance. And I'm just wondering, you've got this armory, and you yourself in your testimony admitted that there's no record, really, of munitions going into an armory, leaving an armory. There's no written record. And I'm just worried, I'm concerned about what is the status of our surveillance, our camera surveillance at those facilities, if you could enlighten the committee.
Yeah, very significant issue, Congressman, that we, because of the munitions issue as you laid out and what we just found in our contraband report from a couple of weeks ago that I referenced, one of the significant weaknesses in the BOP system is known areas in institutions where correctional officers and inmates who might want to engage in wrongdoing know they can go and not be on camera. That relates to firearms issues, that relates to drug dealing, that relates to other contraband trafficking. It also relates to a big issue for our office, which are alleged civil rights violations. We are responsible, in my office, investigating allegations that federal correctional officers abused inmates. And the FBI is responsible for investigating inmate-on-inmate abuse. And what we often find is whether we can make those cases and address those alleged civil rights violations turns largely on whether the action, the alleged events took place in an area where there was good camera coverage or not. And as you might suspect, oftentimes inmates or correction officers who want to engage in that kind of conduct know where to go, so they're not on camera. That's a very significant issue the BOP needs to address.
Okay. I see my time has expired. Unless, Mr. Orner, you want to add anything to that?
No, Congressman. I will stand by my answer.
All right. Thank you, sir. Thank you. I yield back. Thank you for your courtesy, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Wahlberg, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate the opportunity to have this hearing, because certainly with all the posturing that's going on about the Second Amendment and about use of firearms, we certainly can agree that the Second Amendment is part of the Constitution, but any violation of law, illegal activity, criminal activity relative to firearms has to be treated that way. And certainly we should not be adding to the potential of criminal activity by not having secure usage and storage of government-supplied firearms. And so I appreciate the panel being here. Mr. Orner, what are ICE's requirements for how officers secure firearms in their parked vehicles?
As I noted in my opening testimony, we take this issue very seriously, and we have comprehensive data about the program, and we examine those data for trends. One of the things we noted several years ago was that the majority of our lost weapons are in fact stolen, and most of those are in fact stolen from vehicles. When we saw that trend, what we did was put in place at ICE and our other components a requirement that any officer who is permitted to carry a weapon in a vehicle now has a gun locker in that vehicle. And that is in place at ICE and department-wide.
With all its subcomponents as well?
Yes.
I assume that part of that is a locked vehicle along with the locker?
The locked vehicle, the locker, and yes, any magazines or components of the associated with the weapon are required to be in that gun locker.
And that's been a policy subcomponent-wide for how long?
Just about 2 years.
About 2
I can
years.
give you the exact date, but it's roughly 2 years.
What administrative actions, if any, have been taken against the officer involved in the situation, the lost weapon that led to the Ramos killing back in 2013, or 2015, excuse me?
Disciplinary action is handled by the operational chain of command. I am not a part of the operational chain of command, so I don't have an involvement in individual disciplinary actions.
But I assume you know what took place. Could you inform us of that?
I'm aware of the tragic incident, of course, but I do not know that individual action. I can get back to you on that.
I'd appreciate that if you could supply that to us. Though I would hope that in evaluating your efforts to secure firearms, we'd also have an understanding of how it's working and what has taken place as far as actions, administrative actions against officers that for one reason or another lose their firearms. Did the incident lead to any changes in ICE protocols related to securing firearms, and have those changes been applied to other DHS components?
That particular incident didn't lead to policy changes. It led to more scrutiny and a new look at the implementation of our current policy.
So I guess I go back again. What did we learn from that particular incident, and what changes have been made then?
Well, what we have learned is the criticality of securing officers' weapons in their homes and in their vehicles.
Well, that's a given. That I would assume is a given.
That is a given. Every individual case of a lost or stolen weapon is investigated. The actions taken as a result of those losses depend on the nature of the incident. Somebody who does not follow procedures and leaves a weapon sitting on the seat of a car, that would mandate a disciplinary action. On the other hand, if you have, for example, a Coast Guard officer doing a boarding who is jostled and loses the weapon overboard, that's an entirely different type of situation, although it's still a lost weapon. So the action taken is dependent on the nature of the incident, and
I see my time has expired, unless you're willing to give me a little bit extra time, and I see you're not. So I understand that. Thank you.
Gentleman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the ranking member, Mr. Cummings of Maryland.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Horowitz, based on your audit, you said that there are still 11 recommendations that have not been completed. Is that right?
That's correct.
And what would you say, give me the top 2 or 3 that you are most concerned about? I know you're concerned about all of them, I know that.
Yeah. Well, there are a couple. Primarily involves updating their inventory control systems, because we found you couldn't track, when we compared what they showed in their monthly reports versus what they had in the institutions, oftentimes the numbers didn't match. That's such a basic issue that has to get fixed.
And how many guns are we talking about in total? Do you have any idea? In other words, I'm trying to figure out how big the universe might be. Sounds like we don't have a handle on it because we don't have accurate information, but
I didn't put down the exact number of guns. I don't know.
would you know, Mr. Kane?
Can.
You know how many guns we're talking about?
I do not know the number of guns, but they are not accounted for under the automated systems that Mr. Horowitz is referring to at this point.
Right. The inventories that I'm referring to, the firearms are tracked in a separate manner, which is why when we checked those, we found no lost firearms, because they actually did track the firearms. Our concern are what are called expendables, which is ammunition. In other words, things that you use up in some way, chemical agents, stun munitions, those kind of things that once you use them, they're no longer in inventory. That was the problem BOP had. They weren't keeping control and understanding what they were using versus what might have been stolen, for example.
So, Mr. Kane, you had told the chairman you would be getting those 11 items done. When do you plan to do that? How soon? Because one thing I've learned about being around here for 20 years, that folk just put stuff off and put stuff off, wait for another Congress, and things never get done.
Thank
So
you.
I'd like to have some dates.
Thank you, Mr. Cummings. The safety and security of the public, the staff in the institutions, and the inmates is our highest priority, and we're working very actively.
You're not answering my
already,
question, sir.
and
Just
we are-
answer.
we're working with the OIG on the new.
Can you give me some deadlines? Can you give me 6 months? Tell me something.
We expect to be able to test that new system in early winter.
Early winter?
Yes, sir.
All right. Because I'm going to ask the chairman to call you back.
That's fine.
'Cause I've realized that's the only way we get things done sometimes.
Fine, sir.
Inspector General Horwitz, do you agree that the inventory controls alone will not prevent federal firearms from being used by criminals?
That's correct.
And why do you say that?
Tracking the weapon is obviously different from preventing their improper use.
Well, you know, I support the President's efforts to explore gun safety technology or smart guns that will require fingerprint verification. Mr. Chairman, in April, the Department of Justice Homeland Security issued a report outlining the administration's strategy, and I asked that that report be entered into the record.
Without objection,
Thank
so
you.
ordered.
Thank you very much, Chairman. That report states that this technology could, and I quote, prevent use of an officer's weapon if it fell into the wrong hands, and it might discourage theft of such weapons in the first place. These developments could, in turn, shrink the supply of stolen firearms to the secondary black market, curtailing a dangerous source of weapons for criminals, end of quote. I would venture to guess that many of the guns used to murder people in my district and to harm people are stolen guns, not from federal agencies, but stolen. Mr. Orner, given all of the potential of smart technology, do you agree that it is at least worth exploring as one of the many solutions that could help prevent criminals from doing harm with stolen federal firearms?
I certainly think that that's an issue worthy of evaluation. I'm reliant on the marketplace, and those types of technologies, to my knowledge, aren't in the marketplace today. But as it's evaluated, as it's become available, we will of course take a very close look at that, and we will determine in which of our operations such technologies will be efficient and effective and will improve the safety of the weapon.
I see my time is up. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. The chair recognizes Mr. Heights of Georgia for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Orner, let me just continue on here. Obviously, we're talking hundreds of weapons that have been stolen or somehow lost over the last several years. Do you have any idea how many of those weapons were used in crimes?
The only crime I'm aware of is the one that the chairman noted. I do not know that, but we will get back to you. We can go back to the National Criminal Investigation.
Have any of the firearms been recovered?
Yes, we regularly recover firearms.
How many?
Well, for example, in 2015, we reported 72 lost firearms. We would now adjust that number to 56 to account for those recoveries.
All right, so there's still 56. I mean, this is unacceptable. There have been people killed in America with weapons that were stolen or lost, whatever the case may be, by federal agents. And the Customs and Border Patrol seems particularly egregious with this. Why does CBP stand out?
I think it has something to do with the nature of their operations. You have agents in the field, sometimes running through vigorous environments.
That is not an excuse to lose a weapon.
There's no excuse for losing a weapon, Congressman.
So my question is, why are they the worst at losing their weapons?
The size of the organization and the nature of their mission. would be the reasons. There is still no excuse for losing a weapon.
Well, and your answer, frankly, makes no sense. What in the world does failure to properly secure a weapon means? If it's, as you state, inexcusable, there's no excuse to be losing a weapon, and yet the CBP continues to lose weapons. They're the worst at it. Why can they not secure a weapon? What does failure to properly secure a weapon mean?
We have very detailed procedures on...
That's not my question.
It means you did not follow established procedures. For example...
So why is following directions so difficult? Where are we dropping the ball here?
Overwhelmingly, our agents in the field do follow direction.
Well, overwhelmingly, a sizable number of them evidently don't follow directions. And we've got to get to the bottom of this. It is inexcusable for Americans to have to fear being injured or killed by weapons that were issued to government agents who are incapable of properly handling their weapon. Would you agree with that?
I would agree that any case of improperly handling a weapon is unacceptable. 75% of our weapons losses were in fact thefts.
All right. Well, that just poses more. That doesn't help at all. I mean, how are guns continually being stolen? It just goes on and on here, just trying to wrap my mind around this. Mr. Kane, let me jump over to you. What is the cause of the numerous inventory errors that OIG has pointed out?
It's the outdated systems that we are now replacing, and when they were constructed, they were built to serve the local institution, and now we're moving toward a national database that will allow national centralized auditing of regular reports, et cetera, in addition to digital logs of inventory.
So is that going to help you determine what is an inventory error versus what kind of weapon or ammunition has been stolen or missing?
Other audits that are done and as part of the ongoing work of the Bureau of Prisons will check to see if those kinds of errors are occurring. And
so is that a yes or no? Or are we going to be able to determine the difference between an inventory error and that which is stolen or missing? It's not a difficult question. That's what inventory is all about. We've got to know where these ammunitions and weapons are going. I see that my time has expired, Mr. Chairman. I thank you, but we have got to get to the bottom of this. Americans should never fear the irresponsibility of our government agents who are incapable of keeping properly a weapon issued by our government. With that, Chairman, I yield back. Thank you.
Gentleman's time has expired. The chair recognizes gentlewoman from New Jersey, Ms. Watson-Coleman, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Although I doubt that anyone would disagree with making sure that federal firearms are secure, this hearing seems to me to be a bit of a red herring. In the midst of the conversations sparked by last week's Democratic sit-in, in the midst of calls to make common sense changes to our nation's gun laws, in the midst of public agreement on the two things that Democrats asked for a vote on, no fly, no buy, and closing loopholes in background checks, we're having a hearing about guns. But it's about a tiny fraction of guns, and certainly not the guns causing the majority of the problems. Even the title of today's hearing is misleading because while there are a variety of inadequate safeguards when it comes to firearms in our nation, federal weapons seem pretty low on the list. It may be more worthwhile, for example, to bring NIH in to examine the impact of the congressionally imposed and NRA-endorsed ban on studying the impact of gun violence. I think our time would also be much better served with witnesses from the Justice Department or the FBI to talk about bullet stockpiles and how to track large ammunition purchases so that we can prevent mass shootings and make daily gun violence a little less frequent. I know for a fact that I'd love to ask about my own Stop Online Ammunition Sales Act. In Connecticut alone, there are more than 51,000 registered assault rifles. 179 of them are owned by one individual. And according to one 2014 estimate, nearly 1 million assault weapons have gone unregistered in New York. So I'd love to hear from witnesses who could tell me more about what these owners typically do with these weapons, and maybe something more about how we can ensure that they remain out of the wrong hands. All of that is to say that I hope that this hearing isn't the end of our examination of inadequate safeguards, Mr. Chairman, because if it is, then I believe that it is our work that is inadequate. Thank you. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman from South Carolina, and so let me follow up with my esteemed colleague opposite. I can assure her that this hearing is part of a series of hearings that we have had dating back long before some of the tragic events. As she will recall, obviously we've had GSA and a number of others that we're in, and I have a strong commitment to work in a bipartisan way to continue not only the work that we've started many, many months ago, but to continue to work on an inventory and control process that would address that. And so I just wanted to let the gentlewoman know of not only our previous efforts, but our continuing efforts to address that. So let me go ahead and go to some of the issues.
Will the gentleman yield?
Sure, without a doubt.
Thank you. I certainly appreciate that. I look forward to our working in a bipartisan way on this issue. At the end of the day, I think our actions speak louder than words, and that as we approach these hearings in the future and we bring people before us, then I'd like very much to get at the issue that is plaguing our communities, both in mass killings and in individual lives that are lost daily, particularly in the urban communities and the poorer communities. The issue of
Reclaiming my time. I appreciate your comments.
Thank you.
All I'm saying is that this is a long-standing process of which this committee has taken seriously long before some of the most recent political events that have sparked some of this controversy. And so let me come back to some of the issues at hand that seem to be systemic. And gentlemen, you're here this morning because of your inventory and your systems being deplorable. There's no other word to describe them other than to suggest that the lack of controls at your agencies need not only great work, but systemic work to make sure that we can keep track of them. Would you all agree with that? And you're shaking your head, yes. Mr. Ordner, all of you would agree that you have systemic problems that need major, major work. So let me ask you a little bit further, because one of my concerns, the gentlewoman mentioned about the rounds of ammunition, and I honestly get questioned more from DHS with regards to rounds of ammunition and why you purchase so much, only having I guess officially, according to Open the Books and Dr. Coburn, who I hold in very high regard, he said that there's only been 881 times that you've actually, DHS has actually fired their weapon in terms of official capacity, but yet you've purchased 1.7 billion rounds of ammunition. Why such a huge inventory of ammunition?
We use strategic sourcing on the purchasing of ammunition to get the best price. The numbers you quote are contract ceilings, not the amount that is actually purchased.
But if we go to the amount that you actually contract, I've looked into this dating back 3 or 4 years. So let me shift to something else. Can you tell me why DHS would have acquired 4,700 bayonets?
I am not familiar with the issue of bayonets, and I
Well,
will get back to you on that. I suspect it's ceremonial units, but I'm going to have to get back to you.
4,700 bayonets
That
and
may also
ceremonial
be-
units for
That
DHS?
may also be a contract ceiling, but I will get back with you with the data on that. And on the issue of ammunition, we do issue an annual comprehensive report on the purchase.
Yeah, I'm very
and use
familiar
of
with it.
ammo.
Yeah, I'm very familiar with it. So let me ask you, in terms of coding, because I'm going to come to you, Mr. Kane, very quickly on coding as well. Can you tell me why you would code something to show that it was a procurement type for firearms code that in there it was, quote, for the cable dude, close quote?
For the what?
Cable dude.
Did we code it that way?
Yeah. Would you say that that is something that should be used as a firearm code?
Absolutely not. And
So you're starting to get my point. So, Mr. Kane, let me come to you because I'm just as concerned that you have inmate clothing at $67,000 worth that is coded as body armor. Why would that be?
I have no idea, sir.
Or feminine hygiene products worth $15,000 coded as body armor. Any reason why Bureau of Prisons would do that?
No, none that I know of.
We also have that you had $113,000 worth of food that you coded as chemical weapons and equipment. Does that make sense?
It does not.
Okay, I think we are all getting my point, I believe, at this point. If you can't code it right, the best new system in the world isn't going to fix the problem. And so what we need is real accountability, real coding, and a real inventory system that honestly you could probably put on QuickBooks today and do better than what we're doing. And with that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Cartwright, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to you, Inspector General Horowitz, for being here today and for your good work bird dogging the Bureau of Prisons and watching how they handle their firearms. This is work that reminds us how important it is to make sure our federal agencies effectively, efficiently, and safely manage their firearms. The reason we do this, of course, is that when guns get into the wrong hands, they can have devastating effects on our communities. The tragic massacre in Orlando that is not yet a month old acutely reminds us of this, and my heart breaks for those families. Inspector General Horowitz, given your investigative expertise, when looking for solutions to problems, why is it important to consider all contributing factors?
Well, when we look at issues, one of the things that's important to us when we issue a report is to be prepared to answer questions about whatever the potential factor could be, using the inventory and the issues here today, for example.
To get to the whole truth, and I totally agree with that. For example, we have to make sure our background check systems have the appropriate information in place so we can actually make sure that people who are prohibited from having guns actually do not have guns. That is why I support the administration's efforts in this area. Attorney General Lynch has written to states on how important it is that they share relevant information so that the background check system can be accurate. The FBI is overhauling the system to make it more efficient in order to improve processing times. Even the Social Security Administration is working to make sure appropriate information is shared with background check system about people prohibited from getting guns for mental health reasons. And yet, what are we doing here in Congress? Well, we're trying to change the subject. Just a few weeks ago, House Republican leadership blocked Democratic efforts to bring legislation to the floor that would prevent suspected terrorists from buying guns. Somebody needs to pinch me. Why would you prevent a bill like that from coming to the floor? They wouldn't even allow a vote. Even now, Even now, after Americans across this country have protested, Speaker Ryan won't agree to hold a vote on meaningful gun violence measures. Instead, Speaker Ryan will allow a vote only on a proposal that was written by the National Rifle Association and rejected by the Senate. And even this deficient measure is being pulled back. It is unacceptable. There is still no action on legislation that would help improve our background checks, which is critically needed to keep guns out of the wrong hands. Mr. Orner, if we can stop the flow of guns to criminals, would this help support DHS's efforts to keep our nation safe?
As a general statement, the obvious answer is yes.
It is obvious, and I thank you for that. We have smart, reform-minded solutions right at our fingertips that could help keep guns out of the wrong hands. I urge my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to give these solutions a chance and at least bring them up for a vote. With that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields. I'd just like to point out, remind the committee that this hearing topic began back in February with a hearing that we had with GSA regarding federal agencies' handling of firearms. This committee sent letters to 34 agencies for information on their firearms inventories and how they're handling them. And I will also say that this discussion will continue. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Gosar, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Inspector General Horowitz, good seeing you again.
Thank you.
In March 2016, you released a report showing you audited 3 BOP armories in my home state of Arizona: FCI Phoenix, FCI Tucson, and USP Tucson. Did your audit find that firearms and munitions are secure in those 3 locations?
We found that they had kept track of the firearms, but we still found the inventory control issues that we found more broadly.
Any other findings that you feel are important in regards to those 3 facilities?
Well, broadly speaking, what we found at the institutions generally was we couldn't reconcile the monthly inventories with the actual inventories when we were doing it. So we didn't have confidence in understanding how those discrepancies occurred, whether it meant a poor tracking system or whether it meant something worse, like people stealing or taking improperly various munitions.
Gotcha. Now, you testified in fiscal year 2014, the Bureau of Prisons recovered 2,410 weapons in BOP institutions, a 5% increase from the fiscal year 2012. That's an astronomical number, and that many weapons shouldn't be even making their way into these secure prisons. It begs to highlight this. Can you quickly reiterate some of the important recommendations your office made to prevent contraband and firearms from making their way into the BOP facilities?
Absolutely, Congressman. This is a very important issue. And primarily, they involve tracking the contraband that's found, because BOP doesn't know in a big picture way how this contraband might be getting into institutions. Staff search is a very important part of this. There is not an effective staff search policy at the BOP. We talked about that 13 years ago in 2003. Sadly, as the incident I recounted involving our own agent who lost his life at a BOP institution when a corrupt correctional officer had a weapon in the prison that he should not have had in there, used that firearm to shoot and kill Agent Buddy Sentner, and shot, but survived, fortunately, a BOP staff member. There needs to be an effective staff search policy. There needs to be better camera systems, as I mentioned earlier, in response to Congressman Lynch's question. There needs to be tracking of what is occurring in the institution. BOP needs to do a better job on their new technologies they are using, to their credit. But what we found when we went out to institutions was that the correctional officers and staff didn't understand fully how to use the tracking technology and the new technologies that were being used. Also, how to use them consistent with the Prison Rape Elimination Act, which requires various steps to be taken before X-raying various people going into institutions. So we had a number of findings that we think BOP needs to take to address these issues.
Mr. Kane, were you paying particular attention to that?
Absolutely, we are, Mr. Congressman, and we agree.
So why are we, some of the things that were brought up 13 years ago, why are we still even talking about them today?
We have actually made changes in policy, as Mr. Horowitz referenced earlier, in 2013, and another update concurred with by our union this spring in 2016. But the OIG identified additional potential improvements. We agree, and we are going to actively pursue them.
So, Mr. Ellis, were you paying attention?
Yes, sir.
Because it seems like all I get, and this committee gets from you is double talk in regards to inventories and numbers. You know, we get handbook pieces copied out of handbooks. So I want to ask you again, were you paying attention?
Yes, I might respond to your question two ways. One, the BLM does an inventory of their firearms every 6 months. We last did one, it was last January, and then recently completed one here, would be at the end of June. In regards to the question about the information that you get back, what I might say that the committee
Okay, so let me interrupt you. I got a limited amount of time. Do you know how many firearms have been lost since 2005 from the BLM?
I do.
How many?
We've had 8 firearms lost. 1 was lost in the mail. 7 were stolen. Of these, 6,
And how many were ultimately recovered?
6 were recovered.
Do you know how many of these lost firearms were actually connected to any criminal activity?
1 that we're aware of. 1.
Well, I'm running out of time here, Mr. Chairman, but thank you very much. Yield back.
The gentleman yields. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from New York, Ms. Maloney, for 5 minutes.
Thank you for having this hearing. It's a truly serious issue. Some of my colleagues and I just came from a meeting with 91 people, the average number of people who die each day, not each day, from gunshot wounds in our great country. And they were all people who'd lost their loved ones and been shot themselves. I mean, it was heartbreaking, absolutely heartbreaking. And on June 21st, in the city that I represent, New York, there was a van coming into the city that had a broken window. So they stopped the van, and they opened up the van, and it was filled with machine guns, grenades, and a whole cache of weapons coming into the city of New York. So really, I want to thank you for looking at the federal firearms inventories. I think it's important. But I would say it is a small drop in the bucket, given the amount of guns that are in our country. Believe me, if guns made people safer, we'd be the safest nation on earth. And one report showed that since 1968, our country has lost more men and women to gun violence than we have lost in all of the combined wars that we have experienced, including the Great War for our independence that we just celebrated last weekend. So I want to talk about this, and I think that I'm glad you're looking at it, but I think it should be looked at in a broader way. The Department of Homeland Security is the largest law enforcement agency in the country, and of the 21 agents responding to it, the agencies responding to the Department of Homeland Security, they reported the highest number of lost, stolen, or missing weapons was an average of 69 per year. Now that's important, but there may have been 69 weapons in that van that they stopped going into New York. I mean, it's a huge problem. In contrast, over 230,000 guns are stolen each year during burglaries from private citizens. So I'd like to ask Mr. Horowitz, given these numbers and given your investigative experience searching for solutions to problems, would you agree that non-federal firearms also affect our communities?
We've certainly had situations where non-federal firearms have affected communities. The example I gave earlier where our agent was shot trying to arrest the corrupt correctional officer was shot using an unauthorized firearm.
Well, actually, some of your agents testified before this Congress several years ago and asked for us to make trafficking in guns illegal, make it a felony. It's not even a felony now. How dumb can we be? And to increase the penalties on straw purchases. And they said, look, we want stricter gun enforcement laws to protect ourselves. This one agent testified that they don't even bother to go after gun traffickers because there's really no penalty. It's not even a felony. You know, straw purchasing is buying guns for people who are prohibited from purchasing them. And in 2000, the Bureau of Alcoholic Tobacco and Firearms examined its gun trafficking investigations and reported that straw purchasing from federal licensed dealers was involved in nearly half of the ATF investigations studied and connected to over 25,000 firearms. So I'd like to have this report entered into the record, which I think is called Following the Gun, Enforcing Federal Laws Against Firearms Traffickers. Could I have unanimous consent to place it in the record?
Without objection, so ordered.
And this points out that straw purchasers and trafficking is a huge problem. And the chairman and I, not the chairman, but the ranking member, we hope the chairman will join us, but the ranking member and a number of us on this committee introduced legislation making trafficking in guns a felony and increasing the penalty for straw purchasers. This would make our agents safer. This would make our people safer. And I just am really imploring my colleagues to not only follow up on this important report that's been done, but to also respond by supporting this bill. Practically every law enforcement group in the country endorsed it because it said it would make their agents safer. And we are in an epidemic. We are losing too many people. I had to leave a speak out of mothers and fathers who'd lost their children dying in their arms from gunshot wounds because it was so too horrible to listen to. And it's preventable if we could just crack down not only on the number lost from the agencies, but the number stolen from homes, the number that are given to mentally ill, deranged, terrorist people, and let's join hands and work together to get the guns out off the streets, no fly, no buy, and comprehensive background checks. It's common sense. Thank you. I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and gentlemen, thank you for being here today. What training do agents receive on properly securing their firearms? Whoever would like to go first. Mr. Kane?
Our officers are issued firearms in very limited circumstances, but they also do use them during training. They're issued from our armories and returned to our armories. They are tracked in a system, as Mr. Horowitz indicated, that is effective, accurate inventories of firearms. We have not lost or had any stolen since 2005, the time of search or research suggested by or requested by the committee. But our training begins in basic training. We have annual training. We do training in disturbance control, sorts of events, et cetera, and all of those